possible by high-speed broadband in public libraries. And we have three panel members. I'll start with Tom. Tom Fortin has over 25 years working in public libraries throughout the country. He is currently the Deputy Director of Library Services for San Mateo County Libraries. We also have, as part of the team, Derek Wolfgram, works as Redwood City's Library Director, and prior to that, he was appointed. To that appointment, he served as the Deputy County Librarian for the Santa Clara County Library District. He is a graduate of Bowling Green State University and holds a Master's of Library Science from Kent State University. And then we have Cliff Frost, who's here up trying to get the computer working. Worked at Berkeley for 25 years, first as a programmer and then as a network engineer until he was pulled into management. First of the network, then also of the telephone system, and finally entire IT infrastructure for the campus. Cliff started in the network group in UC Berkeley Campus IP Network, has a few dozen computers on it, and then he left in 2009. It was dozens of thousands. So after leaving University of Berkeley, Cliff was infrastructure director at the University of Hawaii and did private consulting, and then joined CENIC in 2012 and is now project manager working to bring the California libraries into the CENIC fold. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and I'll give you a 5-minute warning. Just a few housekeeping things. At the end of each presentation, we'll have an opportunity for Q&A. Just let me know, raise your hand, I'll take this microphone so that you can ask your question to the panel members. Okay, thank you.
Well, good afternoon. I don't have a PowerPoint presentation, so I'll just begin. It's a little hard to follow the previous presentation from SF Jazz. I thought that was really cool, and it really opened up my eyes to what can happen with a new kind of access to something like CalREN. A little bit of background. The presentation that we're planning this morning is I'm going to be talking about my experiences working in public libraries since the advent of the internet or the internet revolution and how libraries have evolved in our programs and services. And then I'm going to hand it over to Derek, who's going to essentially vision what we can do with access through the CalREN network. But again, this morning's, or the presentation from SF Jazz, it really looked to me like it was a new technology. It wasn't, for me anyway, it wasn't an improvement in a current technology. It just felt like a brand new technology. So that's really exciting because I think it means that there are probably things that we can do that we can't even imagine yet. So again, I'll start off by introducing myself. I'm Deputy Director at the San Mateo County Library. I have worked in libraries across the country, East Coast, West Coast, Midwest, and in between. I'm happy to be here in California with the advantages that we have, like things like CalREN. So I want to start by saying that we're very grateful for the connection to CalREN and to CENIC, and we look forward to the opportunities for growth that it provides to public libraries and the communities we serve. Like I said, I'm going to give you an update on what's currently going on in public libraries these days relative to the explosion of innovation happening because of the internet. To begin, I want to impress upon you at least 3 things that I hope you take away from this afternoon and remember about public libraries today. Number 1, public libraries are busier today than they ever have been. That's a fact. You can look at our metrics. We're busier than public libraries have ever been. Today is the day for us, and we're looking forward to continuing that change. Our services and programs have evolved since the internet became widely available. And rather than withering and becoming a relic of the times, we have innovated and changed our service model, and we're transforming communities. Number 2, public libraries help kids succeed. From helping children build early literacy skills and story times, to helping them with schoolwork and after-school homework centers, and preventing the summer slide through summer reading programs, public libraries are a key component to children's educational experiences and successes. Number 3, public libraries are community connectors. We are often the only free and accessible place for people to jump on the internet. We are bridging the digital divide that you hear so much about, but that few organizations can really respond to as broadly as public libraries can and do. For these reasons and others, it's vitally important for public libraries to provide a quality online experience, and that's why we're here today. As I mentioned, I work for the library in San Mateo County, which is a joint powers authority. We serve 11 member cities with public library programs and services at 12 branches and bookmobile services to the unincorporated areas of the county. Yes, we still have bookmobiles, and they're really popular. Our service areas extend from East Palo Alto to Foster City and Millbrae and the Bayside. And on the coast side, we serve communities from Pacifica to Half Moon Bay and then down to the Santa Cruz border. In San Mateo County, you'll probably know that we're smack dab between Silicon Valley and San Francisco. And though we mostly serve well-off, tech-savvy communities, our challenges mirror those of other public libraries across the state. And that is, with our heavy usage, again, we're busier today than we've ever been, we often bump up against technology limits, mostly related to bandwidth at peak times of the day. In fact, in its 2014 report, High-Speed Broadband in California Public Libraries, the California State Library reported that 75% of California's public libraries have low-speed connectivity of 20 megabits per second or less. And that's actually slower than the connectivity that's found in most homes. It also found that 2/3 of California public libraries are using their connectivity at or over capacity, effectively rendering the connection useless for patron or administrative activities during certain afternoon after-school hours. So even in wealthy San Mateo County, and I'll point out that Atherton, which is one of the wealthiest cities in the country, is in San Mateo County and one of our service cities. Even in wealthy San Mateo County, our libraries lack sufficient bandwidth. At peak use times, patrons are sometimes unable to access their email due to slow speeds. So you can imagine the feedback we get on that. And even in some of our tech classes we offer, instructors will demonstrate an activity during the class, but must then instruct the class not to actually do the function because the network will not support it. In a recent class where there were 20 participants learning how to use ebooks, the network stopped entirely as everyone tried to download content simultaneously. So, heavy use, running up against the ceiling. So how did we get here? I'm sure that some of you are thinking that public libraries are no longer relevant, offering antiquated services from an earlier age, like accessing print literature and nonfiction, a place only to go if you want to check out a book. I've run into plenty of people who are asking me things like, who uses the library anymore? And again, they're woefully misinformed. I guess that they assume that because they don't use the library, no one else does. Fortunately, that's not the case, and personally, I have a good perspective on how things have changed in libraries. I started my career 25 years ago when microfiche was the relatively new technology of the day. In libraries, we still use card catalogs, and things were quieter in those days. We served fewer people. We especially served fewer kids. I don't know if Derek has the same experience, but that's what I remember from the bad old days. It wasn't cool to go to the library back in the day. And I have to say I'm a child of the early 80s. I graduated high school, and I know that it was not the cool thing to do to go to the library. And in fact, hardly any of the kids that I grew up with went to the library after school. But that's really changed. So just so you know, I want you to know that it is cool to use the library today, and kids are actually leaving high school and going to the library. Just ask the teens who are using our new equipment and software to shoot and edit quality video projects or writing code on high-powered laptops, creating their own video games. So back when the internet came along, I do have to admit that, and then later when Google came out, I do have to admit that I thought I might need to rethink my career choice. But wonderfully, as it's turned out, it's because of the internet that libraries have evolved and gained new relevancy. First, because we offered the community the only free and accessible place to get on the internet, and for users to be introduced to and experience new technologies as they were developed. Often they could experiment at the library before buying for the home. It was our good fortune in libraries to introduce online databases, how to connect with email, the basics of technology training like using a mouse. There are still people who don't know how to use a mouse, so that's the first thing we teach them. Teaching people how to use Google, how to use Office Suite. We started helping people with resumes, writing resumes and doing job search assistance. We let kids play video games. We offer Wi-Fi hotspots. Now we're circulating ebooks, and on and on. For many in our communities, the public library is the only resource that offers these tools in a friendly, open, and non-threatening environment, and of course, it's all free. So while adopting new technologies has made us more attractive and a more active resource for the community, it's not only about the hardware and software, it's also about our programming. We are using technology to help people sift through information, solving issues related to consumer health. We are very active in helping people get signed up in Covered California. We help people with issues related to citizenship, starting small businesses, career development, and most dear to our hearts as librarians. And I think Derek was a children's librarian at one point, maybe? Or you've done children's programming, yeah. Closest to our hearts is programming for helping children build early literacy skills and developing early reading and giving children the tools that they need to succeed. Even in a county like San Mateo, nearly half of the kids are not reading at grade level by third grade. As wealthy as San Mateo County is, just think about that for a second. Nearly half of the kids enrolled in public schools are not reading at grade level by grade 3. So there's a lot of work to be done, and the library is playing a vital role in preparing kids for school readiness in a way now than we weren't doing in the past. We're much more intentional about it now. Even in a mid-sized system like San Mateo County, we're not like LA Public, we're not like LA County. Still, we served over 2 million people who walked through our doors last year. We circulated over 3.2 million items, both print and digital. We offered over 7,000 programs that were attended by 210,000 people. Like I said, we're busier than ever, and we're changing people's lives. All these new programs and services have brought us to a place where we are often maxing out on bandwidth, and consequently, starting to deliver a poor product to our customers. Recently, we used the assessment and benchmarking tools that were developed as part of the EDGE initiative, which was funded by the Gates Foundation. We've learned that by looking at the assessment of our peer libraries, that we're not alone. Most other public libraries are hitting this bandwidth ceiling as well. So before we start losing customers and losing ground on all of our recent successes, it's critical that we expand our bandwidth beyond what the commercial providers can give to us or can provide to us. And this brings me full circle back to where I started with my appreciation for having been invited to the CENIC conference. And happily, through CalREN, public libraries will be able to maintain and even magnify our newfound status. We will have the opportunity to serve all of California's 38 million residents with high-performance access to all the myriad resources that constitute 21st century digital citizenship. To discuss how we expect to continue to evolve and innovate with this expanded bandwidth, I'll turn it over to Derek.
Thank you very much, Tom, and also I'd like to express my thanks for being invited not only to the CENIC conference, but that public libraries are now a part of the CENIC family. That was an extremely exciting development for us to kind of get on par with all of the other educational institutions and cultural institutions in the state of California. Because whether it's thought of that way by the legislature and the governor in Sacramento or not, what public libraries do really is an essential part of the education infrastructure of how we take care of kids and adults in California. So it's great that we can be in a position to be on par with our partners in education as far as what we can offer. And so, as Tom said, he was giving kind of an overview of our current status and the bandwidth pressures that we're currently facing. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the opportunities we see and the hopes and dreams that we have for what we can do with having gigabit connectivity in libraries. There are lots of opportunities to expand the role of libraries in the community. And there's kind of two categories that I would say those things fall into, and they're categories that public libraries have been in for a long time. Part of it is about connecting people with stuff, getting people to be able to connect with content and read and watch videos and find information online and be able to locate content and information and knowledge that is going to be helpful to them in some ways in their lives. And then I think the much more profound thing that we do is connecting people together around these different concepts and finding ways to have people work together on projects. So, as I said, enhancing the ability to connect people with stuff and people with each other is nothing that's really new for public libraries. It's what we do now, but we can take it to a whole new level with our gigabit connections. I see these two innovations as kind of two separate tracks, but of course there's overlap between things related to stuff and large files, and there's things related to people working together. The concept of BA that Mount Allen talked about in the keynote before lunch. I wish I'd heard that yesterday. I wish I was aware of that concept yesterday, because I think it really profoundly describes what we try to do in libraries with connecting people together and providing a common ground and a safe place for collaboration and participation and cooperation on a whole variety of ways of building knowledge. For those who don't remember exactly, the short definition was a shared space for emerging relationships. And I just think that that's a really eloquent summary of a role that public libraries can play with this technology. So I have a few examples I'd like to share about what some libraries are doing. They're not in California because we are just now coming into the fold. So if maybe at next year's conference I'll be able to talk about all of the amazing things that are happening in California public libraries. But for now, I'll take some examples from our neighbors from other states, and I think that there are certainly things that could have pertinence here. In the category of stuff and connecting people with resources, one of the first cities to get a gigabit connection in their public library was Kansas City. They were one of the first cities to get Google Fiber, as you may remember. And one of the things that they've started working on and are just getting ready to roll out is what they call a software lending library, to provide web-based access to applications that people might not be able to afford, or they may not use that frequently. So they were essentially creating a web-based remote desktop that people can get in and use Office or use Photoshop, and they're not limited by the state of their computer at home. Since it's all web-based, they don't have to have a certain level of processing power, and they can access those applications just by visiting the library on the web. And another thing that involves large files that libraries have very much gotten into the business of are maker spaces incorporating 3D printers and 3D scanners. It's certainly possible to move those files around right now with our connectivity, but it does take a while. And so the opportunity to give libraries a home for entrepreneurs and tinkerers and artists to create new things is really going to be increased by the higher speeds that we'll be able to deliver those files over. Another element of library service that I think is really related to this goal are local history resources. There are a lot of libraries with substantial collections of historic photographs or maps or drawings or architectural plans, all sorts of great local resources and really deep primary resources about local history that we can find ways to not only make those available, but give people the opportunity to hack those and play with those and create new things out of them. And then one other thing I think is the ability to offer massive open online courses. I think that libraries create a lot of the programs that Tom talked about, a lot of lectures and one-off things, and we do this content and it exists in the moment and it exists for the 10 people that are in the room, and then it's gone. and the opportunity to not only provide that collaboratively with other places, but also to to preserve and stream that and share that for later, I think is something that's really profound. One of the great projects that the Chicago Public Library has done, they have a center called the U-Media Center, which is oriented toward teens, and it's a place that is all about hanging out. I have to remember their little acronym. It's like hang out, mess around, and geek out. Something like that is what they're trying to achieve with that. And but it's much more than that. They have music and video recording and editing facilities, and they're really giving the teens the opportunity to create new content and to create something wonderful together while they think they're having fun. They're actually in the library and they're learning a lot and they're creating something wonderful. And with the example of what we saw in the keynote before lunch, obviously that could get taken to a whole new level. Right now, the excitement of being able to move those big audio and video files around is one thing, but then to allow for live collaboration with another site is pretty amazing stuff. One other kind of application is to have co-working spaces, or in addition to co-working spaces, maybe a startup incubator, places where people from the tech community or from the business community, local individuals who are trying to create something, can come together at the library in a shared space and leverage the power of the computing that and the bandwidth that may not be available to individuals on a local basis. So the last piece that I do want to share is really about the different ways that we can connect communities and connect individuals and really take advantage of the power of the network. I mentioned earlier that being part of the same infrastructure as the community colleges and K-12 and the UCs and the CSUs and all of the other partners that are part of CENIC, there's a really amazing opportunity for leverage to take some of the great things that are happening at those institutions and sort of transmit them to the public library or allow the public library to collaborate on those, and vice versa. There's a lot of amazing stuff happening in public libraries that I think would be of interest to folks in the formal education system, and we could plan together and share together and just make those things more meaningful and more widespread. Another great opportunity for public libraries is a place to host hackathons or places for people to get together and try to address community needs or create new applications or teach coding skills. The library is a natural site, I think, for the open data movement to give people the tools to take government data and hack it and rearrange it and visualize it in new ways and make that content available further. So I think that solving big problems in a collaborative way is something that the library can definitely be a big part of. A small thing that we did at Redwood City Public Library recently, we had a group of 8 teens who participated in an event called the Global Game Jam, which was a global event with about 27,000 people participating in dozens of countries across the world. And they were basically in one day, they created video games from start to finish. And, they weren't necessarily the most complicated games you've ever seen, but they taught kids real coding skills in a very short period of time. And fortunately, since we only had 8 teens and we had 8 mentors from local tech companies participate, we didn't blow out our lab like Tom's class had with the ebooks when they all tried to download something at the same time. But that certainly would happen if we had a larger attendance. So the ability to open those things up and address them with a really large group is great. One fun library project that I've just always thought was a great example of kind of combining some of these things. The New York Public Library has a historic menu collection. They've got about 45,000 restaurant menus from throughout the history of New York and its restaurants, and they've they're crowdsourcing a transcription because many of them are handwritten and many of them are in scripts that optical character recognition won't pick up. And so they are making a community effort to transcribe those menus and put them so there will be a giant database of restaurants geotagged with their locations, including dishes, including prices, offering comparisons in different neighborhoods at different times in the history. And, the ability to deliver that stuff in a bigger way is something that's pretty great, rather than someone having to come into the library and sift through boxes of menus. It can really be opened up. The last place I'll mention is the Chattanooga Public Library, who has really pulled all of these concepts together in one. The fourth floor of their main library, they've created a space that's about 12,000 square feet that is a maker space and a community gathering space. And in November, they opened a computing area called their Gig Lab that they opened in partnership with many other local organizations. And they're really sort of testing all sorts of things across many disciplines. They're looking into opportunities for music collaboration. They're looking into opportunities for scientific collaboration. I was texting earlier with Nate Hill, who's the librarian who runs that, and he was talking about having people in the Gig Lab remotely controlling microscopes that are available at other institutions to do studies, and I thought that was pretty excellent. He mentioned language learning groups that can be done collaboratively online. You can connect with people in other places that maybe speak languages that aren't that prevalent in your community, but you can find ways to build connections with other sites. One of the really fun things that Nate's working on with the fourth floor space at Chattanooga is he's built a partnership with two other libraries that have gigabit access. One is the Burlington, Vermont Public Library, and the other is Kansas City. And they don't really have plans for that. They don't really have an intended outcome. They just thought it would be meaningful to open up this window amongst three different cities and provide for that kind of real dynamic interaction like we saw at the keynote, with people being able to really, feel like you are in the same room with someone else, and just see what happens when people from those different communities have an opportunity to work together and to play together. So ultimately, as you might gather, I think the power of this for libraries is the ability to enhance the way that we facilitate human connections, and the way that we facilitate creativity, and the way that we facilitate my new favorite word, ba. And I think that all of those things are actually what we are best at in libraries. So I look forward to seeing what comes next. And with that, I will turn it over to Cliff, who will tell you what actually is coming next with regard to California libraries getting on CENIC. So thank you.
Thanks, Dirk. So you all will be spared my PowerPoint slides, but I'll get to read them, which is a no-no, right? I'll stand back a bit, maybe. Yeah, I'll use this one. All right, the first slide says who we are. Well, you know that.
You can use that.
And then the next slide says who I am. Yeah, okay, I got that. And I did want to start out by saying that when Lewis Fox, sitting back there, who's my boss, said about a year ago that he wanted me to lead this library project, he didn't know that was the nicest thing he could have said to me. This is about the most exciting project I can remember working on for something like 20 years, back when I was a network engineer. And that sort of goes back to my experience is a little different from Tom's. When I was a kid, going to the library was totally cool. That, at least in my family, that was something we did all the time, and it was it was just a wonderful experience. And I I never thought of a library as not being cool. I've always sort of thought, oh, I love libraries, but then, I grew up and I could buy my own books and do my own thing. So I sort of stopped going to libraries until a few years ago, and then they became relevant for some reason to do with things I won't go into, stealing music or something like that. As a network engineer, I can't be caught running BitTorrent to download things. In any event, I got connected with the local libraries and found that they were completely different than I remember as a child, but also totally the same. And that was pretty exciting. My observation is that they're much busier than when I was a child, and I'm glad to hear that that's actually true. It wasn't just a figment of my imagination. So, with that said, I'll give you a status of where we are. The big purpose you've heard all about, we want to get the libraries onto the California Research and Education Network. And once we have libraries on there, we will have a complete intranet, an research and education intranet in the state of California. And I think that really opens up a lot of possibilities for collaborations across all the segments with each other, and SF Jazz will lead the way. And I thought that one or both of you mentioned something really sort of profound about libraries, which is that they're actually in their communities. I was talking, I tell everybody I'm leading this project, and people ask me sometimes, not always, but libraries, they still exist. What's their purpose? Just like Tom was saying, they clearly have a purpose. One of the things that really interests me is this notion that they're embedded in the community. They've been in the community forever. They have the historical references for that community, and that's actually a resource for the world. And somehow getting them online and getting those resources available to people around the world is an amazing opportunity, I think. So, coming back down to earth, the goal of the project that we're working on now is to get high-speed broadband to all of California public libraries. The leadership of this project is the California State Library, the Califa Group, and CENIC. And I'm going to emphasize CENIC since that's where we are. Tom mentioned a couple of the issues around need. I wanted to just say another really shocking thing when we studied how libraries are connected is that at least a quarter of them are connected with asymmetric service. That is, they get lots of bandwidth to them and hardly any bandwidth back up to the internet, which is treating libraries just like you in your home, like you're just going to watch Netflix or something, as a passive consumer of information as opposed to actually a participant in the information highway or economy or whatever you want to call it. And also, another sort of shocking thing, less than half of all the jurisdictions were taking advantage of E-rate and CTF discounts that were available. So our approach to this need is to bring libraries onto CalREN at much higher bandwidths. We are aiming for a minimum of 1 gigabit per second to each library. We buy circuits in high volume, so that immediately drives costs down. And we're taking care of the work of getting E-rate and CTF discounts, so that drives costs down. And we don't require, the way we do it does not require SIPA filtering. So libraries, a lot of libraries weren't using E-rate because they would have to implement Child Internet Protection Act filtering software, and libraries are opposed to filtering, so they didn't want to do that. We aren't opposed to filtering. Libraries can filter if they want to, but we don't require it. And the FCC won't require it through the way that we're doing this. We have started with some pilot projects in 2013. These guys are part of the pilot group, San Francisco Public Library also. This year, we're aiming to connect a very large group of libraries. Next year, probably an even larger group, and the year after that, hopefully a smaller group of stragglers. Some libraries have things like long-term contracts they can't get out of that will keep them from getting connected quicker. The process. A lot of people think that this is just hooking up a library, and we can just do this overnight. It turns out it's a fairly complicated process, and I wanted to say something about it. We have about 8 phases to go through to get libraries connected, and I'll briefly describe them. So phase 1 is information gathering. To do this right, we have to know how the libraries are set up, how their current networks are set up. It's not terribly complicated, but we want to make sure we don't propose something that breaks what a library has working. Then libraries need to give us letters of agency. This is a thing that allows us to act on their behalf for E-rate. Then we file the Form 470, this is E-rate paperwork, and we issue an RFP for basically hundreds, if not thousands, of circuits on behalf of the collection of libraries. And this is this key part of getting low costs, is getting hundreds of circuits at a time. So this helps libraries essentially be part of a buying club. Once we get the quotes or bids back from providers, we have to wade through all that and decide which are the best, which are the lowest cost quotes. And then we have to present the information to the libraries, have the libraries review them, talk with their tech staff, talk with us about details. Then we have to do contracting, and we have some stories about contracting. Then there's purchase of hardware. Libraries typically will need new hardware to implement these circuits. We're hoping to work out a bulk purchase of hardware on behalf of libraries so that the cost of the hardware will go way down. And then we get to actually install things. That's when the hookup happens. And that's not a trivial process all by itself, but that's the 8th phase of this process. It takes quite a lot of work to go through this with dozens of library jurisdictions at a time, representing hundreds of actual library sites. And that's what we're doing. So this first year, the process was even more convoluted because we weren't able to start until late fall. We should start this summer. The next round will start this summer. This year, we actually had to file the Form 470 and do the circuit quotes before we talked to any libraries. So in many cases, we had to guess what the design should be and do our best. And in some cases, we got the design wrong. Libraries are slightly different than we had imagined, and those folks will have to go next year. But it's amazing. Quite a few came through that weird process, and we're still working on connecting them. Right now, we're in the phase of contracting with libraries, which is pretty exciting. For example, this is different from any of our other segments, even K-12s, which have some exciting distributed chains of command. Each library jurisdiction has to have a contract. And each library jurisdiction somewhere has a lawyer sitting around whose job it is to futz with contracts. And so, for example, there are more ways to indemnify each other than you can imagine, and we seem to have found them all in this process. So, so I have here the fix for next year is kill all the lawyers. Another problem that we've run into is early termination fees. Sometimes we've been able to get libraries out of their current contracts, sometimes not. There was a transition from CalNet 2 to CalNet 3. Those of you who know about the state contracts know about CalNet 2 and 3. The transition from 2 to 3 didn't go smoothly, so some libraries got stuck in a contract that was helping them get through that transition but has early termination fees. So the fix for that one is kill all the lawyers. Say that again? Terminate, yes, the early termination fee. Yeah, terminate the lawyers. So that was the update. That's the status. And now you guys get to ask us questions.
Any questions for the panel members? I can circulate the microphone.
Well, this is basically a question regarding the infrastructure. Once the infrastructure is in place and once these libraries have been connected to CENIC, how will the connectivity of these libraries compare to the rest of the country?
Don't have a whole lot of data to back this up, so I'm gonna shoot from the hip a little bit on it. In the research that I was doing to prep for this talk, I found information about a dozen public libraries out of the 9,000 different library systems in the United States that are doing something with gigabit. There may be some that have something and they're not promoting it, or they're not making a big deal of it. It's just part of their infrastructure. But I think that this will move California from the tail end to the leading edge in a pretty short period. I don't know if you know, Louis.
We have discovered that it's the sort of most ambitious and largest library technology effort networking effort ever undertaken. Will be by some distance. The gigabit efforts often are one city and sometimes one library in that city. And we're really looking to get gigabits that affect every library on the planet.
Libraries can't afford bandwidth is the issue. They, $200 a month, even that is too much. So this probably makes it a lot more affordable.
The only other place that I'm aware of where something comparable has been done is Hawaii.
Oh, those Hawaii.
Because of the fairly cogent leadership, a couple of people there. But it's not the same scale or.
The other thing that makes Hawaii unique is Hawaii public library system. One head, and California has 1,100 libraries that fall into 180 plus different jurisdictions. And so, while I was talking to someone else about this earlier, while there's sort of a natural cascade with the education system of the information, going from the county offices of ed as a place for districts to connect, and then as a place for individual schools to connect, there's not a net like that. It's really dealing with 180 plus different units of local government, each of whom has their own way of doing things. And so it's, as Louis said, it's quite ambitious to take on all of that at once, but thrilled that we're doing it.
I would just like to say, because I'm at a county office of ed, and we do a lot of this, but the rationale and the logic for what you're doing is just, I'm really applauding CENIC for taking this effort, because I can tell you that we may provide access to school districts and then to schools through that district, but the gap is when those kids go home. So many of those kids do not have access at home, and that library is that key place. They may have after-school programs. We have seen our students actually show up on school campuses during the weekend just to try and take advantage of the Wi-Fi, and going to those libraries would be a logical solution. What I guess part of my question is, when you were talking about doing 470s and doing the whole E-rate process, one of the things we're trying to help and look at cooperative and collaborative working relationships is with our, as a county office serving K-12, we're looking at where community colleges can connect, where UCs can connect, where libraries can connect. Many of these libraries are in the same neighborhoods as those school districts and those schools, and there seems to be a logical connection. It's just how you go about doing your 470 and getting bids out that might or might not tie in for that process, but I would think it makes a lot of sense to kind of take advantage of that economy of scale, that leverage. So, not really a question, but.
Thank you. So, speaking about the cascading programming, looking at the libraries, I look at like public schools, and they have this thread of how things are programmed. You know, the core competencies and things of that nature. Is there any correlation within the state of California about that? And of course, I speak to that from how does one looking to insert programming across a large platform into that direct tie to the communities, which is the libraries. How does one approach that? You know, do you have to do each individual library? Is there some type of, format, or, you get where I'm going?
I would say that it's a hybrid of those two things. One of the things that is a beautiful, wonderful thing about public libraries is that they are connected to an individual community. They are responsive to whatever the needs and whatever is going on in that community. That being said, there are some kind of overarching frameworks. The one that comes to mind most for me is there are federal grants that are Library Services and Technology Act grants that are administered through the state library, and that the state has an LSTA plan that has key elements of service that they fund through those grants, which are then sort of, I guess, the de facto priorities revolve around early literacy, and they revolve around workforce development, and they revolve around STEM projects. And so I think that those are places where there's some commonality that we can tap into that goes across all the different jurisdictions in what we're doing.
And Derek is the microphone on? Yeah. Sorry. Derek is past president of the California Library Association, so a lot of programming ideas are shared across members of the California, which nearly all library systems are individualized. Yeah. So a lot of times they're programming shared and encouraged.
Any other questions? All right, let's give these gentlemen a round of applause. Thank you so much.